Good day, everyone. My name is Maricel S. Diaz, and I am from Bisamayman. Today, we will talk about modern music, okay? The modern period in Western music history lasted from approximately 1890 to 1945. As with Romanticism, modernism is both a historical time period as well as a philosophical aesthetic. In everyday conversation, modern typically means current or recent. As a term referencing music, modernism was first used by critics to describe forms of musical expression adhering to the radical changes happening at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. Unlike the terms Romanticism or Classicism, modernism describes relatively few unifying musical traits. The sounds of modernism range from the wistful and bucolic to bizarre and jarring. Okay, now let's talk about the historical context. Because modernism was a reaction to the events of the late 19th century and early 20th century, it is helpful to understand the great degree of social and political upheaval that was happening during these decades. The political revolution sparked in the latter half of the 19th century continued spiraling sorry, into military conflicts such as the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, the Spanish-American War in 1898, and the First World War in 1914 to 1918, which was known at the time as the Great War and the War to End All Wars. Additional major events included the Russian Revolution, the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, the rise of Joseph Stalin as dictator of the Soviet Union, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany, and the Second World War, which ended with the dropping of the atomic bomb on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. From a historical perspective, the sheer amount of death and destruction during these 55 years was unprecedented, and many in the artistic world came to feel that the old ways of representing the human experience were no longer qualified to handle this terrifying new reality. Though not everything, however, was terror and suffering. Modernism derived great inspiration from the many scientific achievements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Charles Darwin's seminal work of evolutionary theory on the origin of species challenged religious beliefs concerning how life came to be. Through his psychoanalytic exploration of the human psyche, Sigmund Freud proposed that humans were irrational, subconscious forces driven largely by hidden desire and drives. And then, with Albert Einstein's theories of relativity in 1905 and 1915, our perception of time and space were fundamentally changed. Additionally, the inventions of recorded sound, the telephone, automobiles, and airplanes resulted in major changes to how the world communicated and operated. Modernist composers thus began to challenge what was possible to do with music, experimenting with a variety of ways of constructing music. Modernist composers saw themselves as the avant-garde, or frontline troops working to advance music through their sound experiments. Many of these composers experimented with musical sound through timbres, rhythms, and tonality. One of the few and unifying traits of musical modernism was the rejection of factional tonality laid out by Jean-Philippe Romeo in his 722 treatise. Composer at the end of the 19th century broke the rules of tonal harmony to explore different sound colors, new ways of organizing sound, polytonality, and even post-tonality. Now, we will discuss the different sound experiments of the period as we introduce four of the most prominent styles of modernism, which is Impressionism, Primitivism, neoclassicism, and atonality. The first of these styles, Impressionism, is seen as both an outgrowth of Romanticism in general and a reaction against German Romanticism specifically. Impressionism was first recognized in French painting through artists like Monet, Manet, Degas, Cézanne, and Regnault, whose work were not seen so much as depicting the world as it was, but representing an impression of reality. Like the painting and poetry aspect of the movement, musical impressionism suggested its objects through innovative sound colors, an avoidance of a strict meter, and the use of non-functional harmony. Okay, an example of Impressionism is Claude Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun from 1894, based on the poem by symbolist Stéphane Mallarmé. Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun is a single-movement symphonic poem that focuses on instrumental solos whose tone colors blend into each other throughout an airy, open orchestral framework. The melody contains dotted quarter notes, 16 notes, and triplets, disrupting the sense of time and forward motion and providing a dreamy impression of Mallarmé's poem. Our second style, primitivism, takes the romantic focus on nationalism and folk music to a new level. Composers, influenced both by national pride in the folk of their country and by Charles Darwin's theories of evolution, focus on humanity as being more natural is and disengaged from the modern world's inventions, trials, and tribulations. As with Impressionism, primitive, as with Impressionism, Primitivist Primitivist composers utilized non-Western harmonies and scales, but were also preoccupied with driving rhythms and odd meters. Primitivist composers set their music to stories based on folktales and imagined prehistory, such as in Igor Stravinsky's ballet The Rite of Spring, which depicts a series of pagan-inspired rituals and dances. In contrast to Impressionism and Primitivism, the composer of the neoclassical movement rejected Romanticism by looking back to music of the 17th and 18th centuries. Neoclassical composers returned to Baroque genre like the suite, concerto, and fugue, and utilized forms like the sonata form, minette, and rondo with modern and even jazz-influenced harmonies. These musical forms were not an outgrowth of the music of the time, but instead were objects out of time meant to provoke thought. Okay, neoclassical sound experiments tended to include smaller ensembles with a greater emphasis on wind instrument than in previous time periods. Igor Stravinsky's neoclassical period was ushered in with his composition of the ballet suite Pulcinella, based on music from 18th century. The ballet centers on the character of Pulcinella, an Italian commedia dell'arte figure, and the costume and set were designed by Pablo Picasso. The original melodies, currently believed and to have been composed by Domenico Gallio, were revised by Stravinsky for a chamber orchestra and featured a heavy emphasis on wind solo instrument with modern rhythms and harmonies. The last one is atonality. Atonal music is music that is composed without a tonal center or key. Now, what exactly does that mean? Let's watch this video to explain what is atonality.